Good afternoon. Welcome to the second webinar of the Cooking for Success series, Recipes for Growing Food-Based Businesses. This webinar series is a partnership between the National Association for Latino Community Asset Builders, NALCAB, and the Californian Association for Microenterprise Opportunity, CAMEO, and has been made possible with support from the Kellogg Foundation. This webinar is being recorded, and we will distribute the recording and slides to everyone who has registered. Also, attendees have been muted, but we encourage you to ask questions. So please type your questions in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We will monitor them and ask them throughout the webinar as possible, and we'll have additional time for Q&A at the end. Leading the webinar today, we have myself, Storm Taliaferro from NALCAB, and Heidi Pickman from CAMEO. A little bit about NALCAB. NALCAB strengthens the economy by advancing economic mobility in Latino communities. We are the hub of a national network of more than 120 organizations in 40 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico that are anchor institutions in geographically and ethnically diverse Latino communities.
Thanks, Storm, and thanks to everybody who's joined. As many of you know, food entrepreneurship plays a vital role in creating economic mobility for Latino and other immigrant families and their communities as a whole. And I think it's safe to say that if you're here attending this webinar, then you care about the success of the entrepreneurs in your community. We've noticed that CAMEO approaches to entrepreneurial support usually are presented in narrow silos. Either someone is a training organization, or they care about training entrepreneurs, or they care about access to capital. And a lot of you may focus on one thing, and that's okay, but I just want you to know, and CAMEO wants you to know, and we want to increase awareness and work toward a more holistic view, what we call the local entrepreneurial ecosystem. And just for those of you who don't know who CAMEO is, we're the statewide network of entrepreneurial training programs, micro-lenders, and other business service providers that are in this ecosystem that I'll explain in a second. And we do activities like capacity building, webinars such as this, advocacy in Sacramento and DC, and we play a convening role, much like NALCAB does for our members. Some people may call the approach that we're thinking about and trying to push forward as place-based economics. And at CAMEO, as I mentioned, we call it the local entrepreneurial ecosystem, and it's made up of 5 C's, which you can see on this graphic. It's coaching. Coaching is mentoring, meetings, classes, one-on-ones, advising, all that kind of teaching, developing human capital. Capital is the second C, that's the money part, that businesses need to grow. Then there's connections to markets and connections to other entrepreneurs. And that happens in co-working spaces, incubators, but also connecting. By connecting, we mean connecting as in marketplaces, as in, say, online platforms, or connecting to other regions so that you can have, you can export outside your community. And then the 4th C is culture. Culture is how a community sees entrepreneurship. Is it a good, valid career path? And then the 5th C is climate, is the regulatory process. And when these pieces are all in place, small businesses can succeed. They create jobs, they create financial health and wealth for families, and local communities succeed as well. All the pieces need to be in place, and they all interact with each other. And this webinar series is about the local entrepreneurial ecosystem as it refers to the food industry. So we just decided, for the sake of time, to narrow it down to three parts and not go through all of the 5 C's, but I'll remind everybody, they do all work together and all the pieces need to be in place. And if anybody wants to know more, I'm more than happy to discuss the other pieces. Last month we talked about coaching. Next month we'll talk about climate and the policy. And today we're looking at the capital piece. So we hope this series, and pardon our pun, but we couldn't help it. We had a lot of fun here. We hope the series is food for thought on how to support emerging entrepreneurs and transform the entrepreneurial environment for Latino and immigrant families engaged in neighborhood-based small business activity. And our ultimate goal is to ensure our food entrepreneurs are successful and our communities are sustainable. With that in mind, I'll kick it back to Storm.
Thank you, Heidi. All right, so we'll walk through our agenda quickly. We'll do introductions and sort of an audience poll where you type into the response into your chat box. We'll look at some numbers around capital for small businesses. And then we will have our expert guests from California FarmLink and Latino Economic Development Corporation to speak on rural and urban small business lending, followed by a question and answer session, and we'll close with additional resources. So we'd like to kick off quickly by saying who is in the room. Let's see, we'd like to know, how are you supporting entrepreneurs? If you can type in, if you're doing coaching and technical assistance, training or classes, capital assistance, such as loans or equity or grant assistance, some sort of real estate related assistance where you have an incubator or rental space, policy advocacy, or financial capability assistance. Also, if you're a food entrepreneur, we've had some on the previous call, please type that in. Or if you support small businesses in some other way, please go ahead and type that into the chat field now.
Great, so we're getting some responses. We have a new SBCD on the line. Also, a CDFI offers access to capital, a number of groups that offer one-on-one counseling and training programs, groups that offer both loans and coaching, coaching and technical assistance. So a lot of variety of different organizations here on the line.
Okay, great. And a number of groups with whom we're pretty familiar. Great, and one other question. In terms of your organization's experience with lending, if you could let us know if you're not currently lending or in the process of implementing lending, less than 3 years, 3 to 5 years, more than 5 years, or if what you do is refer to lending partners. We'd like to know sort of how deep the knowledge and experience is in lending with the folks in our virtual room here.
Great. So looking at those responses, again, we have a pretty wide range, several who are not currently lending, several who refer to lending partners, and many who have been lending for more than 5 years. I would say lots of referrals here in this group.
Okay, great. Well, we do appreciate all of your attendance here and your interest and focus on this important topic, into which we will dive right into right now, which is growing your client's food business. So let's see, next slide please. For growth, businesses need capital. Access to capital is often critical to a food entrepreneur's ability to meet operating expenses, expand and grow, and succeed. So to set the stage here, let's take a quick look at small business credit. The 2019 Federal Reserve Small Business Credit Survey reports for employer businesses, which are small businesses with paid employees, in that middle column there, and non-employer businesses. Those are small businesses that have no paid employees. Those are the smallest of the small. So these numbers numbers show that as they headed into 2018, 43% of the employer firms applied for new financing versus only 26% for non-employer firms. Then we see these numbers almost inverted, right? When it comes to unmet funding needs, 43% of non-employer firms had unmet funding needs, whereas 29% of employer firms had unmet funding needs. Now, if you look at those unmet funding needs through the lenses of race and ethnicity, 39% of those firms were non-Hispanic white-owned, 60% were non-Hispanic black-owned, and 54% were Hispanic. Now, overall, non-employer firms were more likely to be debt-averse or discouraged from applying for loans, and twice as likely to have debt that is unsecured by collateral, such as credit cards, which we all know have relatively unfavorable terms. Other interesting info towards the bottom there, 32% applied to online lenders, which, for the record, was an increase of 8% over the previous year. And this is despite online lenders' generally less favorable terms, yet faster response times and higher approval rates, and perhaps perceived anonymity are still attractive to borrowers. The 2019 Federal Reserve Bank Small Business Credit Survey report on minority-owned firms, this data shows that of these online lending applicants, 32% of the firms were white-owned, 41% black-owned, and 53% Hispanic-owned. So in the light of this lack of access to credit to small businesses, including food entrepreneurs, we are so happy to have our guest speakers here today to talk about how they are working to help entrepreneurs access funding in their communities. So today we have Mario Graziano from California FarmLink and Emmy Reyes from Latino Economic Development Center. Mario will speak about supporting food-based businesses and entrepreneurs in rural agricultural areas of California, and Emmy Reyes will discuss connecting food-based clients to capital in the Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland metropolitan areas. Right now, I'll turn it over to Mario. Mario, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Storm, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this webinar. I'll wait for the next slide. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Again, my name is Mario Graziano. I am the Lending and Loan Service Associate here at California FarmLink. I've been with FarmLink for a little bit over a year now. Before joining FarmLink, I worked for a bank for almost 8 years. So I am a recovering banker, as they like to call it here. Before I decided to go back to school, I would eventually hear about FarmLink and what they do through school. My role here involves helping clients gather the necessary paperwork to apply for a loan, along with seeing if the inquiry is a good candidate for our loan program. This is typically done by an online inquiry where we receive the information from the client through our website, a phone call, or an in-person meeting. Once we've gathered the necessary materials and see that the client is ready to submit an application, it then gets transferred to a loan officer who then underwrites and types up a memo to present to our loan committee for a decision. Next slide, please. So what is FarmLink? FarmLink is a statewide nonprofit ag lender that started in 1999 as a land linking organization, and it's located in Aptos, California. FarmLink started doing direct loans, however, until 2011 and was later certified as a community development financial institution in 2013, also known as a CDFI. FarmLink collaborates with local and statewide governmental agencies, impact investors, nonprofits, training programs to help farmers access the land and capital throughout the state of California. Next slide. As seen on the slide, our mission is to link independent farmers and ranchers with the land, financing, and information they need for a sustainable future. Next slide. So what is our special sauce? FarmLink provides technical assistance to farmers by offering assistance with succession planning, finding land, and reviewing, as well as securing and negotiating strong leases. We also offer loans that include annual operating loans, land loans, equipment and infrastructure loans, as well as conservation loans. Loan amounts range from $2,500 to $500,000 for operating loans and up to $1.75 million for land loans. Our average loan size of loans that we have deployed is $40,000. Interest rates range between 7 to 8% for operating and equipment loans and 5 to 7% for land loans. We do have application fees of 2% of whatever the loan amount is for all loans with the exception of land loans. Land loan application fees range anywhere between 1 to 2% depending on the loan amount. And in most cases, these loans require a guarantee from the Farm Service Agency, which is a branch from the USDA, which is a 1.5% on top of the application fee. Next slide. So now my favorite slide of the presentation here is our success story. Here we see Berta Magaña. Mrs. Magaña started Magaña Farms in 2011 when she decided to start her own business after working for agriculture or other agricultural companies for more than 30 years. Mrs. Magaña attended ALBA, a Salinas, California nonprofit farm incubator that provides education and training on organic farming. Mrs. Magaña has borrowed from us on 4 different occasions. In 2011, she received her first operating loan of $10,000. In 2012, she successfully, in 2011, she received another $25,000 loan, which she also successfully repaid. And in the following year, she received a $60,000 loan that was also successfully repaid, for which she only actually used $45,000. After a few years of successful repayment on prior loans, combined with an opportunity to purchase land, Mrs. Magaña applied and was approved for a $250,000 land loan in 2016 to purchase a 10-acre property in Watsonville, California. Finally, it is important to know that the land she acquired is a property that she received lease assistance from FarmLink staff, for which it included a first right of refusal. Thank you. Next slide. And with that, I just want to see if there's any clarifying questions or any information that I presented today.
Yeah. Hey, Mario, this is Heidi. Can you go back to, let's talk more about Mrs. Magaña, and
Sure.
Can you talk, you said something at the end, I didn't quite catch that, about her journey. She did something with FarmLink. Can you repeat what she did? And then I had a question about it.
Exactly. So like I mentioned in the special sauce slide, or what we do, part of the things that we do is provide technical assistance to farmers by offering assistance with, reviewing leases or negotiating lease agreements. So Berta Magaña came to us via loan need as well as lease help. So she started with the operating loan of $10,000 as well as a need for lease assistance. So like what I said at the end was that she received lease assistance that included a first right of refusal that eventually later turned into a land loan with us.
Oh, so she bought the property. So you guys, she leased it first, and then and then she was able to buy the property with your help.
Exactly.
Okay. Oh, got it. And do you happen to know how many employees she employs?
I don't.
Okay.
I can get that information for you.
Yeah. Great. And about how many clients does California FarmLink serve?
We've deployed, as of December of last year, a little bit over 330 loans. Out of those 330 loans, it's a total of about 140 actual clients. So the 330 loans include, repeat borrowers.
Okay. And your service area is from where to where?
It's all throughout the state of California.
All throughout the state.
With the majority of our clients coming from the Santa Cruz and Monterey County.
Cool.
We do have a question here.
Good.
I'm sorry to interject. What does Ms. Magaña grow?
Mrs. Magaña grows a diverse mix of organic vegetables with I primarily focus on strawberries.
If anybody buys strawberries in California, chances are they come from Watsonville.
Exactly.
and I'm not sure how much how much they export to the East Coast or across the country, but I'm guessing quite a bit.
Well, I know believe it or not, I was in Toronto. I want to say 4 years ago, and I happened to come across a strawberry basket that had Watsonville on it.
Yeah.
So that was pretty exciting.
Uh-huh. Great. We'll take some other questions about more in depth on how you might partner with some of the other organizations and all that kind of stuff. But are there any other clarifying questions for Mario about him or FarmLink? Or the type of clients they work with?
If not, then we'll move on over to Emmy from Latino Economic Development Center. So Emmy Reyes, thank you for joining us. Please take it away.
Hi, thank you for having me. And I do want to clarify that we are the Latino Economic Development Center located in DC. I know there's another one, I think, in Kentucky. I learned at the last NALCAB conference. But yes, I'd like to begin with talking a little bit about myself. So I'm a DC native. My family is from El Salvador, and I sort of grew up in a family of restaurateurs. My family operated about 4 to 5 restaurants growing up here in DC. And I decided to go to college in Vermont, where I established our school's farm. And 10 years later, it's still operational and sort of self-sustaining. So I'm very proud of that. And after that experience, I decided to work for Chipotle, both in the New York region as well as in the DC area, helping to open new stores and train new managers on operations. And it was really my desire to help entrepreneurs outside of the corporate environment that led me to LEDC, where I now help manage our lending department. And it's a role that's allowed me to also participate on the Mayor's Food Policy Council, where I help advise on legislation that impacts food entrepreneurs here in the DC area. But great, we can go ahead and get started to talk about LEDC. If we could go to the next slide, thank you. So LEDC has been around since 1993, and we really work to fulfill our mission of driving economic and social advancement to low-income residents in the DC area by offering 2 main services. One is that we have a housing department that works with residents who are first-time home buyers, and we help them navigate the various sort of housing programs that are offered to them. We also help with affordable housing preservation. LEDC was recently instrumental in the creation of a tenant union to help organize tenants to improve their living conditions, and we also help work with foreclosure prevention. And then we have our small business program, which is where I will focus for this department, or for this presentation. We can go to the next slide. So our small business programs are really 2 main things. We offer free technical assistance, and we do that by having coaches on staff, as well as subsidizing the cost of meeting with specialized consultants like lawyers and accountants or tax attorneys that our clients may need. And then we have our small business lending, where we could go to the next slide. And here I want to highlight briefly sort of our lending and who we service. So LEDC does between 160 to 200 loans a year. And we've had sort of that loan marker for the last 10 years or so. About 9 out of 10 of our clients are minority clients. I will say that 1/3 of our portfolio is currently related to food businesses. So we're very proud of that, and that's something that's emblematic in all of our markets, not just in DC, but also in Maryland, Virginia. And we can go to the next slide. So in terms of our lending, we offer our loan products from as little as $500 actually, and our loans of $500 are designed to be credit builder loans. So we have clients who are interested in starting businesses, but they know that currently their credit score is too low to access capital down the road. And so we will sometimes start with a $500 loan with the sole purpose of improving their credit score and establishing that credit history so that they are prepared when they're ready to start their business. And then we provide small business loans from $1,000 to $250,000. And I will say that all of our loan products are offered to all of our clients regardless of industry. And we do offer these loan products of up to $250 to startups as well. So unlike a bank that may sometimes restrict how much they lend to a startup or if they fund a startup at all, we sort of have all of our offerings open to all of our clients. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of our food offerings specifically, we have sort of three main programs. The first is our Food Ventures program, which we just started last year. And here it's a free technical assistance with a focus for food entrepreneurs. And through the program, our clients get to work with professional chefs and restaurant managers, as well as restaurant consultants. And it's situated in such a form that it's a cohort, and it's a 3-month-long program. And people who participate in this program come out with their food manager certification, and we try to sort of give them that exposure. We host events for them to showcase their food products, and really make sure that they understand of what the food system really is in the city before they really go ahead and start their business. The next is our restaurant expansion loan. So some of you may be aware that the Department of Health and Human Services has a program called Community Economic Development Projects. And what these are, or what this is that the Department of Health and Human Services funds projects that improve or increase access to employment for low-income residents. So LEDC has been fortunate enough for the last 4 years in a row to be awarded this grant from the program, which allows us to supply up to $200,000 loans to food businesses that are growing or expanding at 0% interest. And so through this program, we have been able to fund 8 new restaurants in the city that have all been pretty successful so far. And these are restaurants owners who are truly committed to improving the conditions for low-income residents. So they have clear programs of growth development for their staff so that people can grow, from an entry-level server position to a more management position. And lastly, we have this food truck loan where we recognize that in the city, a lot of our food truck clients were going to online lenders because of the expediency. Whenever their food truck broke down, they needed something, quickly and weren't as concerned with interest rates. And then, of course, this creates a problem for them on their cash flow down the line once those daily withdrawals begin. And so what we decided to work on was a loan product where we provide the approval within 2 days of receiving the documentation, and we try to disperse the funds on the 3rd day. And we allow them to pay interest-only payments while the food truck is being repaired or established so that they can get back on the roads and getting that cash flow going back on the road. And then the last one. And lastly, I'd like to showcase a couple of our success clients. The first being Sweet Green. Some of you may be aware. They started here in DC with 1 location. LEDC was instrumental in them being able to open their 2nd location. And the rest is sort of history. They're now a national chain, and they're based in California. Another one is Bad Saint. They're a Filipino restaurant. They received funding from us to open in 2015. Since then, they've been featured on the best restaurants in the country pretty consecutively, all 5 years. Their head chef recently won a very prestigious award within the food industry, and they're also on the Michelin Guides for 2020. And then lastly, something that's happening, I think, in many major cities across the country, but here in DC is the sort of creation of a lot of food halls. Food halls have presented a very interesting challenge for food entrepreneurs because it's very appealing, and at the same time, it's a very competitive and expensive process. LEDC has been able to help a number of clients successfully open their locations there. One of the first being Arepa Zone, which is a Venezuelan arepas business. They started with a food truck in Arlington, Virginia. LEDC provided their first loan to acquire a 2nd food truck that operated exclusively in DC. We then provided them with a 2nd loan that allowed them to open their first location in Union Market, which is a food hall here in the city. And then lastly, a year ago, we were able to offer them this sort of 0% interest loan that allowed them to open their fresh brick and mortar. So when they started with the LEDC, they had 12 employees, and they're now up to 47. So we're very happy for them. And, you know, the last client that we're showcasing is Peruvian Brothers, who also started with one food truck. They now have 3 food trucks within the area, and they just opened their first sort of brick and mortar within the La Cosecha Union Market, which is the newest, largest food truck here, or food hall here in DC. And they were the first business within that food hall to sort of finish their construction, and in part was due to our 0% interest loan. And of course, now we're trying to work with other business owners who are trying to go into that space to ensure that it's a fair entry for them as well. And yeah, I think that may be it.
Emmy, this is Heidi. I have a clarifying question on that 0 interest loan. Who are you partnering with, and like how is it structured?
Yeah. So the the Department of Housing and Human Services has this community economic project. And so what it is that CDFIs and I believe some banks as well apply for grant funding from this department for projects that will improve or increase jobs for low-income residents. And so LEDC applies for that grant, and we then disperse that grant money in the forms of loans to entrepreneurs in the city.
So it's a HUD grant, like a federal? Is it a federal grant or?
Yes. Well, yes.
Yeah. So it's a oh wow, that's interesting. That's kind of
just to clarify, the CED grant is with the Department of Health and Human Services.
Oh, the Health and Human
Services. Right.
Oh wow, that's interesting. That's a new resource.
A number of NALCAB members have been able to use this community economic development grant to establish revolving loan funds and incubators, create subsidiaries, but a number of the projects have been related to food.
Is it okay? So is it a CDBG fund or something completely different? Yeah. Okay. So it's different. Okay. Great.
They're completely different. Yeah, we could talk more in the sort of additional resources about it.
Yeah.
We did have another question come through. What is the typical loan size for the food truck loans?
Yeah, they tend to be pretty small. It depends on what they need, right? Our Repozone's food truck, for example, broke down, and what they realized that the engine itself was one brand, and then the facade or the exterior of the food truck was a different brand. So while they initially expected, the repairs to cost $10,000, it ended up costing $25,000. So I would say that we try to cover sort of the immediate expense of whatever repairs are necessary, and that tends to be between $10,000 to $15,000. But we obviously understand that sometimes these things may increase in value, and we try to sort of readily and quickly supply them with whatever additional funds they may need for it.
Great, thank you.
What's your turnaround time on like a short loan, a smaller loan like that?
Yeah, so our food truck loans, we try to get it out within 3 to 4 days.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And
we're working
another question
to make
related,
it even quicker. Yeah.
Another question related to that: is there anything special in your underwriting considerations or how the terms are structured for either your restaurant or your food truck loans that differ from another type of small business loan?
Yeah, so typically, for startups, there's going to be some months in which they cannot, the time period between when we disperse the funds and when they open, we don't want to create issues where they have to instantly start paying it. So we are sometimes able to provide interest-only payments. For the CD, we can't offer a grace period, but if we're using sort of regular LEDC funds and we provide a loan, we are able to provide, 2 to 3 months grace period while they get their doors open before they have to start paying the loan back. I will say that in DC specifically, 1 in 7 restaurants, or about a third of our restaurants that open every year close down within the year. So it is a very competitive and risky industry to go into. Most CDFIs in the area sometimes cap how many food businesses they will work with. Banks sort of outright refuse to fund food startups. And so we strive to be very considerate of what the needs are, and obviously do that in a responsible sort of manner.
Great. If there aren't any clarifying questions for Emmy right now, so we'll say thank you, Emmy, and we'll open up the Q&A session right now, and so we can pose questions to both Mario and Emmy. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box on the right-hand corner of your screen. We'd love to be able to field your questions and get those answered. But I can start us off. If perhaps our guest speakers can talk about what role access to capital overall plays in the very different communities that they serve.
I guess I can start with that one. In our case, the capital access plays a huge role for our community, because in some cases it is the difference between continuing their business or having to shut down their operation. Most of our borrowers are borrowers with repayment abilities that we've seen, but are sometimes turned down because of from traditional lenders, because they don't have the traditional eligibility requirements like credit history or collateral, among many other factors.
Very cool.
Yeah,
go on ahead, Em.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to sort of echo what Mario said. I agree completely. And sometimes CDFIs really do make the difference between whether a business is able to open or not. I also think that we're very important in sort of being a first step for many business owners. Right. My goal is always to help our clients sort of graduate so that they are able to go to banks or access other types of capital further down the line. And so we're really that first step that's necessary for them to be able to grow once the business is ready to do so.
That's a really good leeway, Emmy, into another question I had. If you could talk about, and then Mario, the trajectory of a typical client. So what you kind of have a couple of examples there, but they come to you first to do what, and then how do they grow, and then at what point would you turn them over to graduation?
Yeah, so I would say that for us, oftentimes you get clients who think that money will solve everything, and so first is an assessment to see if what are their true needs, and sometimes once a client really makes it over that $500,000 mark in revenue, that's when we start to be even pickier with what we want to see in terms of accounting, whether they have QuickBooks or not. And so oftentimes we'll pair them up with a coach simultaneously as a loan officer, and the two will sort of communicate and work together to ensure that once this money goes into the business, it is able to help them increase their revenue or adjust whatever issues that they're facing. I will say that, some clients, like a Repasón, for example, we've supplied them with 4 loans, right? And each of those has allowed them to physically expand. But some others, like Bat Saint, for example, it's still the same size it was when it opened 4 years ago or 4 or 5 years ago. It has this sort of exclusivity thing about it going on. And so we think, that's completely fine. Bat Saint has made it to the point where they're just so big and popular, sort of in terms of how they know how well they're known, but physically they don't need to expand or don't want to right now. But our goal is to really be that first step. And then oftentimes, like a Repasón recently came back to us, and we decided that we were ready for them to go onto a bank. And so we connected them with a local credit union here in the city, and now they're over with them. And so that for us was sort of a success story in terms of their access to capital.
Mario, you want to take a stab?
Well, in our particular case, you know, due to the small-scale farmers that we work with, you know, the majority of our loan portfolio consists of these small-scale farmers. So for them, it is important for to, you know, or it is important for us to try to get them to, in this, you know, case, graduate and look for other lenders. But because, like I mentioned earlier, you know, due to the traditional eligibility requirements, because of credit history or lack of credit history, or most importantly, the collateral, you know, sometimes that's kind of a little bit difficult. So in most cases, what I've seen is that they feel comfortable coming to places like CDFIs, or because they feel that they're valued more and treated more humane than if they went to go to a traditional lender.
Great, well, that's very helpful. Maybe we can talk now, if there's another question out there, if you could touch on what's really needed for you to help make a client loan ready. How do you get them there?
Well, in our situation, I believe it's important to create a good system to ensure that we get that information, or we get the information that we need from the clients. One thing I've noticed, or I've seen working with agriculture clients, is that they're extremely knowledgeable when it comes to farming, but it is difficult to sometimes put that information in paper. So I believe it is our job, you know, to ask the right questions and create the right tools to facilitate getting all that information and putting that information in the format that we need in order to be able to underwrite a loan.
Great. And Emmy, do you have anything to add there? I know other groups refer possible clients to LEDC to seek out funding. What advice could you give to them, and what else do you guys do to help make a client loan ready?
Yeah, I would say that our coaches work very closely with our clients prior to providing a loan to them. You know, in terms of, sometimes it's not necessarily just getting a client loan ready, but sort of really ready to run their own business, right? There's a difference between a lawyer who has sort of a passion for baking and decides to open a bakery to someone who's operated or worked in a bakery all of their life and they've finally decided to venture out onto their own. And those two different types of entrepreneurs need very different services and guidance, right? And so we really try to some way find our clients mentors within their industries who are able to share their experience with them. And we're very lucky because a lot of our clients become mentors further down the line, which is something that's really exciting for us. And I think that we try really to connect our clients to consultants to get their books in order, right? We want to make sure that we're not just providing them with a loan, but also providing them with sort of educational financial literacy so that they really understand what they're getting into going down the road. I think we may discuss sort of online lending a bit more later, but a lot of food entrepreneurs go to these online lenders out of a desire for speed, and they get caught into these loans with APR between 100 to 260% sometimes, which is not illegal and very oftentimes used here in the city. And so we want to make sure that they know to avoid those, right? And that there's always another option, whether it be LEDC or another CDFI in the area. You know, when a client's lead is larger than something we have, we work very closely with other CDFIs that offer larger funds to be able to get them that funding that they may need.
Emmy, I mean, I'd like to bring up that's a good segue, and just to briefly mention, online lending is a topic we can probably talk a lot, like for an entire hour on itself, but since a lot of people on this call are not lenders and are working with businesses directly, and all the literature that they portray, they're sort of probably the first contact of a business owner with what I mentioned as the business ecosystem. And it's just really important to be aware of this trend of online lending. It's growing. You saw Storm mention that people seeking online loans have grown from like 24% to 32%. So it's by a full 8 percentage basis points, but if you think the growth is actually 50%. So it's a lot of people are going online to look for loans because it's easy. And so I just want to caution everybody to make sure that that's part of your curriculum. And we'll give you a resource at the end that you can talk to you can get information at, and you can contact me or NALCAB at the NALCAB staff, and we can point you in the right direction to get more information, because those APRs of 200 and of over triple digits really will destroy business. And I think you do see some refinancing of that. Is that true, Emmy?
Yes, and it's a little alarming how frequent that's become, but we have had to sort of refinance a lot of our, I would say several clients' online debt within the last couple of months. I think the holiday period, or when typically for restaurants, the winter season tends to be a bit slower, and it's when they tend to go to those online lenders, not really fully understanding what that's going to do to their cash flow. We had a client recently where we consolidated $50,000. However, they still had to pay what they would have paid in the accumulated interest because they were getting out of it 5 months early. And so those are the types of little catches that sometimes clients don't see. Yeah.
So we can spend a whole hour on what are the problems. And just so everybody knows that not all online lenders are bad lenders. There are some good players out there, and the key thing is transparency in terms. And there are some efforts actually in California, and I know there's a bill up in New York. See how all the different things play together: the policy, capital, coaching. They're all intertwined. So let's move on from the online lending conversation, because we could spend quite a bit of time on that, I think. Are there any questions in the chat box? If there's no questions, I have another question.
There aren't any current questions right now. So to folks attending, please remember that you can enter your questions in the chat box on the right.
And let's bring it back to our communities and what they may be experiencing as far as accessing capital. And what do you see that's different in the Latino food entrepreneurship community that either in trends or in their attitudes toward debt, or what should we be aware of when we're serving this community? Mario?
Yeah, I've also seen, that trend of clients coming in with loans that they've received from, fast lenders. And that's something that I've seen in the past where, clients, because they're in a rush to get their funds, they sometimes opt to go to these type of lenders that promise to give them loans, either that same day or the following day, and unfortunately are not familiar with the terms that these loans come with. In most cases, like Emmy mentioned, some of those loans come with prepayment penalties, and they're unaware of these hidden fees. But for me, the biggest difference in serving the Latino community is more about the levels of experience in owning and or managing a business for each farmer that comes through our door. We have farmers that in some cases have business education or tech savvy or are bilingual, and then we have farmers that are monolingual Spanish speakers, and all they know is farming and need a little more assistance, even though they're from the same community. So understanding and having empathy, I think, is key to helping these type of communities. But in general, I think it's important, in any other type of community, not just the Latino community.
And is that a generational thing, or is it not a generational thing? Are the younger Latinos coming out with, like what you said, more bilingual, more tech savvy?
No, because in some cases I've seen farmers that that are a little older and are tech savvy. What I've seen is that they get assistance from their children or have somebody in the family that can assist them. So yeah, I wouldn't really say it's a generation type of thing.
Got it. What about you, Emmy?
What comes to mind for me is sort of the legacy businesses that I see in the city, sort of Latino, Mexican, Salvadoran restaurants that are now, their children are starting to get involved and take over and considering whether renovating and expanding. We had a business recently. It's called Los Hermanos here in DC. It's a Dominican food. The parents have owned and operated the business for 30 years now, and they finally sort of decided to retire. And now the two brothers have sort of taken over, and we were able to supply them with a CED loan to expand, and now they're trying to build it into a franchise model, and they've already opened 2 new locations, and sort of seeing the different needs that they had, right? Their parents were really risk adverse. They've known LEDC because we're on the same block for years now and never sought any funding from us, and then this younger generation came in and they reached out to us, and now we've sort of helped them expand. And so it's really like a beautiful thing to see, businesses stay within the family and that growth and expansion. And I think I went on a tangent and didn't actually answer your question, but that is what sort of comes to mind to me right now. And I think it's CDFIs in general learning to adapt to the different needs that each generation of Latino business owners needs.
I actually think it perfectly answers the question because I know in some other communities or in the small business realm as a whole, we're going to see a lot of people retire and baby boomers. What do they do with their small businesses, whether they're food businesses or not? But this is a more general trend. And a lot of the the next generation don't want to go into business. So I think that actually is something, what you said is really kind of beautiful about the Latino community of,
wanting to keep things in the family.
Transgenerational, and using this as a way for transgenerational wealth. That's different,
Exactly.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what about, that's a good thing. What about something that's more of a barrier to capital in the Latino community?
Yeah, I think it depends, right? So for recent immigrants, for example, we tend to do our credit builder loans because they have no credit history. And so that's one of the main obstacles I think that sort of recent immigrants to the country may have. In general, there's obviously still some language barrier issues here. But I think in DC, banks in general are starting to expand. Chase and M&T and all these larger banks are now opening locations and branches throughout parts of the city that for a very long time have been ignored. Southeast DC for a long time had, I think, 2 banks serving 200,000 people versus sort of more populated parts of the city where there's literally 8 blocks, 8 banks per block. And so the availability of banking for the Latino community and other low-income residents is something that we definitely have to keep an eye on.
We have a question from the audience here. Can you talk a bit more about serving and lending to ITIN holders and non-citizens?
Yes.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So LEDC, we receive funding both from federal government, local government, but also private funds. In the recent months, Wells Fargo and Chase have both stepped up their funding. And it is this type of funding that we're able to use for ITIN holders. So all of our lending products are available to all ITIN holders as well as people with Social Security.
Okay,
and I can just piggyback
Mario?
real quick off of what, I can just piggyback real quick off of what Emmy said. We are also federally funded, through grants as well as private investors or impact investors, as well as donations. And we do also offer loans to ITIN holders. As a matter of fact, I believe that currently 23% of our borrowers in our loan portfolio consist of ITIN holders.
And if
So
we
it is
can, excellent. If we can also touch on quickly about what's, unique in terms of serving agricultural clients and the rural community versus lending in urban areas.
Sure. The primary difference, in my opinion, is that in agricultural lending, you have, seasonality crops. So in agriculture, most of the time there's no income coming in during the wintertime, which is when farmers need capital to plan, get prepared for next season in some cases. We also have unmanageable factors that play an important role in agriculture, like climate changes, issues with soil or water. So, having to take all that information into consideration when underwriting these loans, I believe this is, one of the biggest challenge and difference between traditional lending and ag lending.
Great, thank you. And well, since we are almost at the hour, we're going to move on, but I'd really like to thank both Emmy and Mario for joining us today and sharing your insight and experiences on this great topic. Today was intended to give organizations an insight into capital options and the environment for food businesses. So we wanted to conclude by sharing some additional resources for those who want to take a deeper dive into this topic. There's the Federal Reserve Small Business Credit Surveys. There's also a link to NALCAB's Small Business Lending and Capacity Building Technical Assistance application through SBA Prime. We have Cameo's Local Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Toolkit, the Small Business Borrowers Bill of Rights, the Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems. They have a really interesting product there on funding resources for food-related businesses, not just in Michigan, but across the country. It's a nice look at options available. There's a link to the Latino Economic Development Corporation website and to the California Farm League website. Next page, please. And then also, we wanted to remind you to connect with us via social media and through these channels. And next slide. Remind you to sign up for the next webinar in this series, which will be 2 weeks from today, February 20th. It will be Ensuring a Fertile Regulatory Environment for Food Businesses. So we hope to see you there. Again, the slides in this recording will be shared with all attendees. Thank you to our speakers and to our co-hosts at Cameo. We really appreciate your sharing your time and your expertise on this very timely project. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.